Hello. Listen, if you're somebody who doesn't like sarcasm, if you don't like people being rude about politicians, or if you think, for example, that the Brexit is working really, really well, it's the best thing we ever did, then possibly this isn't the video for you. You may want to watch something else. But what I want to do today, I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits of Brexit, because clearly there have been some benefits, and I've been a bit harsh in the past about criticising it, and so I want to go through some of the wonderful things that have happened as a result of Brexit. To begin with, I want to talk a little bit about a speech that Keir Starmer gave at Pinewood Studios last week, in which he set out his new, he calls them milestones, or I call them millstones really, but anyway, these replace, but in addition to his missions, because it's still a mission-led government, and it's still going for change, plan for change, and it's I think the missions replace the pledges, so it's an ever-moving feast. But he was only elected 5 months ago on the full manifesto, and then we had the budget last month, and now for some reason they decided it was time to reset the whole thing with these new millstones. Now I am right behind Keir Starmer. I really want him to succeed. I want him to somehow or other pull off what is frankly just about impossible, and the reason I do is because the alternatives are so frightening, so terrifying. The idea of a Conservative-led government, a Conservative government with Badenoch as Prime Minister is too horrifying to even imagine, and even worse still is the idea that Nigel Farage might become Prime Minister, which quite frankly I think is a distinct possibility. And if you think of what sort of government Farage would lead, would he have Lee Anderson as Chancellor of Exchequer? I mean, he knows all about money. Does 30p Lee? And would timeshare salesman Richard Tice, would he be Foreign Secretary? And presumably as Home Secretary, he'd have that guy who beat his girlfriend and kicked her and went to prison for it, because he knows all about prison. So he'd probably be Home Secretary. And so, as I say, I really hope that somehow or other Starmer can pull it off. Although I must say he doesn't fill me with a great deal of confidence. I think he's by nature rather gloomy. He's extremely gloomy. He'd make a great funeral director. I think he's the sort of guy that if he won the lottery, he managed to describe that as an absolute disaster. Admittedly, since he was elected, he inherited the most dreadful mess left by the last government. He's got an almost impossible challenge to sort things out, and I think they're doing quite a lot of quite good things, and they've got some very good people. But I think, because of his stance on the EU and because of his stance on proportional representation, I find it very difficult to support him. So anyway, he gave this speech at Pinewood, and I'll quickly go through the six new milestones, or as I say, millstones. The first one is, and don't forget, he's asked us to judge him on whether or not he manages to perform on these. The first one is that we're all going to have higher living standards by the end of this term, within 4.5 years. We're all going to feel better off. I think he was probably a bit short for time, because he didn't have time to explain how that's going to happen. He didn't have time to explain how we're all going to get better off, where the money's coming from. Presumably, it's all to do with us becoming the fastest growing economy in the G7, which I think is part of his aspirations, I suppose. Number two is he's going to build 1.5 million new homes in the next 4.5 years. I think it's going to be a bit tricky. I think partly because of all the planning problems. He says he's going to sweep them away. He's going to sweep away the planning regulations in the way that he's going to sweep away all the Brussels red tape. Just sweep it away so people can get on with it. I think there'll be a problem with workers, because we used to have an awful lot of building workers come here from places like Romania and Bulgaria and Poland and so on, but they don't come anymore. So there's a shortage of workers already in the construction industry. So quite where the workers are going to come from, I don't honestly know. Perhaps we'll bring them in from Nigeria and Bangladesh. That's where we get people from these days. Number three, he says he's going to make the streets safer, and he's going to employ 13,000 more policemen. That's going to cost, I reckon, getting on for £500 million a year. And this is at a time when it's said that up to 20% of the police force are thinking of leaving because of low morale. So I think it's going to be difficult. And I wonder where these people are going to come from, because we've got almost full employment. So where do you find 13,000 people to become new policemen? Fourth, he wants to improve schools. He wants to make sure that when children start school, they're ready for school at the age of 5 or whatever it is. That is, nobody can possibly criticise that or complain about that. It's anything that is done to help education is obviously extremely good and should be fully supported. He's confirmed that he wants to go for clean power that's net zero by 2030. Although I think he's reduced it to 95% clean power by 2030. And finally, he's going to reduce NHS waiting lists. And you have to say, well, one of the reasons we've got such high NHS waiting lists is because there's such a shortage of staff, shortage of doctors and nurses and so on. So quite how you replace them, how you find them, I don't know. I presume again we'll go off to Nigeria and Bangladesh and India to find people. But I think it's a bit of a challenge. But no doubt we'll all judge him in due course on how he succeeds with those 6 millstones. What he didn't mention, incidentally, was immigration. He didn't mention a word about immigration. I mean, considering that's one of the most pressing issues for most people. And he didn't say anything about the fact that we're almost certainly going to have to spend a lot more money on defence, because we're living in a very dangerous world now. But what was most noticeable about what was missing from his speech was the economy. Now, all these things that he wants to do all want more money, and as I've said so many times before, the only way you're going to get more money is by improving productivity and by increasing economic activity. There's no other way. There's no other source of money. You can't just go on borrowing. You can't go on printing money. But that wasn't even mentioned. It's just kind of a side issue. I noticed Kemi Badenoch in PMQs this week. She said how she pointed to the front bench of the Labour Party. She said not one of them has ever had a day's experience of business in her life. Bit hypocritical, since the Conservatives are much the same, but I don't think they get business. I don't think they get that priority above everything else is the economy. Without the economy being fixed and being improved, there's no way any of these things are going to happen. But going back to Brexit, now if you have a look at this map, the top map, the blue countries, that's the EU. Those are the losers. These are the people all going bankrupt, and they're all corrupt, and they're all dishonest, and they're all falling to pieces. They're terrible. Well, the people, well, we did well to leave them. And if you look at the bottom map, this is the future. This is CPTPP countries in red. I mean, just look at them. Look at the potential. There's Peru, there's Chile, Vietnam, there's Brunei, Japan, New Zealand, all the countries as far away as you can possibly get. Think of the potential. Think of the markets there for what? Clotted cream and airplane engines and Harris tweed. I mean, it's huge market. Look at Africa. Great big empty area there. All potential markets. This is where we should be aiming. Forget the EU and all their 500 million relatively prosperous and similarly developed people as us. It's the world we've got to go after. Now, there have been quite a few stories in the press this week about the consequences of Brexit. A lot of moaning, people just moaning, making an awful lot of fuss about it all. For example, there was in Sky News the other day, there was an article about the fact that our exports to the EU of food have gone down by £3 billion a year. It said British food sales to the EU have fallen by more than 60% on average across the 3 years since Brexit. British businesses have blamed mind-boggling bureaucracy on a £3 billion a year hit to food exports since Brexit. A new report by the Centre of Inclusive Trade Policy, CITP, has found that the shipping of UK food and agricultural products to the EU has fallen by more than 16% on average across the 3 years since Brexit left the single market. Industry experts blame the decline on added layers of regulation required to send products to Europe since Brexit. Before the referendum, there was frictionless trade between the EU and UK. See, moaning. They interviewed a guy called Sean Ramsden. He's a CEO of some outfit called Ramsden International, which is a huge company that exports food all over the world. And he told Sky News that he's had to hire 9 extra people to deal with the horrendous new paperwork requirements. Now, you see, that's framed there as a negative. I mean, those are 9 jobs that those people wouldn't have had. And if you think of all the thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs that have been created by firms who needed to employ people to fill in paperwork, to fill in forms for exporting. Some when it's animal products, sometimes it's sort of 20 pages for a single export. And these are all new jobs. You've got to look on the positive side. It's not all bad. I tend to look at Brexit on the negative side, but these are good, positive, serious jobs. This guy Ramsey, he also said he had to shrink the range of his products. He had to put up his costs and extend the lead time to ship them over from 3 days to 3 weeks. There was, a lot of the food is stuck on lorries, as it is when it comes into the country. Well, people just got to wait, and this is in order to comply with additional checks and bureaucracy. I mean, we are not food self-sufficient. We're going to need food, so we should stop exporting any food anyway. We need to keep it. We need to hoard it. And so it's not a bad thing that we can't export food to the UK anymore. He went on to finish off by saying that the regulation work involved, the complexity is mind-boggling to the point that it's significantly shrunk our European business. We are trading less than half what we previously had. In the meantime, of course, we've delayed rules on an inspection on goods coming into the UK five times already since we left the EU. And the phased introduction, which began in January, is, according to industry chiefs, is likely to add billions to consumer bills. So our food prices will go up, but I mean, we just got to put up with that for the independence, not having to rely on these awful people in Europe as a market or as suppliers. Now, a couple of other things. The Resolution Foundation, it's a well-respected think tank, they say that small firms have seen their exports to the EU fall by a third, and 20,000 companies have already stopped exporting to the continent since Brexit. Well, too bad. They've got other markets, as you saw from that map before. They can go off. They can go and supply Chile. They can supply Vietnam. They can supply other countries. You're just going to go and, as Norman Tebbit once said, a minister in Thatcher's government, if you haven't got work or business local, you just get on your bike. They get on a plane, go to find new markets. Stop whining. Somebody else is whining. It's the British fashion industry. They say their sales and business have declined as a result of Brexit, heightened customs barriers, administrative costs, a workforce shortage, and the lack of VAT-free shopping for tourists have negatively impacted the industry's growth. Well, too bad. Sell somewhere else. Stella McCartney and Steve McQueen. I mean, have they got branches in Harrogate, in the north of England, in Wales? I mean, they open up other markets in the UK. Or they can go off to sell, I don't know, sell in Bangladesh, whatever. But the good news this week is that France has a lot of confusion with the government there, political confusion, and that's wonderful news because it means that we were right to leave. We were right to leave because we don't want to be involved in any of that stuff. And look what's happened in Germany. They're waiting. They've got a certain amount of political turmoil at the moment, which will be resolved in due course. And so you can see they're all doing worse than us. This is one thing that everybody's doing worse than us. It's bad everywhere. And I did look at a few charts. I thought you might be interested to see. The first one shows homelessness in the UK. This is from the Financial Times. Now, it's not only people sleeping rough. This is people who are in temporary accommodation because there's nowhere for them to live. And you can see we're world leaders in that. Second one shows social security payments and levels of social security payments. And you can see we're in the bottom of the very bottom of 36 advanced countries. Next one shows state pensions, and again you can see we're bottom of 26 countries. And here's an article from the Times about life expectancy falling, probably for the first time in 100 years, I would have thought. But anyway, life expectancy has falling in this country. And finally, of course, we are now free. That we've broken free from the EU. We're now free to deal with our water as we wish to, and in the interests of the profits of water companies, of course, we don't have to worry too much about water quality, and you can see the consequences in this final map. Now, apart from the economy, the other reason we left the EU, we voted to leave the EU, was immigration. And at the time we left, I think there were something like 200,000 to 300,000 a year coming here, including students. And last year, I think it was something over 800,000 people came to this country, a net migration. And in fact, according to an article in The Independent a few days ago, it said Britain saw a bigger increase in net migration last year than any other developed country, according to the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. It says the UK's population grew by a record 750,000 in 2023, a 52.9% increase on net migration figures a year earlier. It meant the flow of immigration into the UK grew more quickly than the United States, Germany, Canada, France, Australia, Japan. You see, we're leading the world in immigration, now that we've taken back control. A guy called Mark English, who's something to do with some outfit called European Movement UK, he said what's clear is that Brexit has made it harder for employers, especially the NHS, to get the workers they need rapidly without red tape. And as a result of this red tape, British people have lost the right to live, study, and work and retire in up to 30 other European countries. Well, nobody really wants to go and live in Europe anyway, so I mean, that's no big loss. But not being able to get all these people, you see, what we're going to have to do, and what Keir's going to do, he's going to train up our own people to do these jobs that these hundreds of thousands of people are coming to here to do at the moment. And he says it's a point of fact that the policy of his government is to reduce both net migration and our economic dependency on it. He said, and the priority is going to be train up our own people. So when you've got almost full unemployment, you've got all these millions of people waiting for hospital treatment who can't work, and you've already got shortages of labour in so many different sectors, and you bring in all these hundreds of thousands of immigrants on temporary visas. I mean, how are you going to train people up? Who are you going to train up? It takes 6 years, 7 years to become a doctor. I don't know how long it is for a nurse, but whatever. Where are all these people going to come from? The people are going to be trained up. But anyway, it'll be better because there won't be any foreigners here. Foreigners. Absolute top priority is not having any Europeans here. We've got rid of all of them almost, except for the ones who living here permanently and are married or whatever. But the ones that came here to work, we've got rid of, which is terrific. And now it's just a question of getting rid of all these Nigerians and Bangladeshis and things. Now, one of the components of the high figures are students, and it seemed that quite a lot of students were bringing dependents with them. If somebody came here to do a PhD or something for a couple of years, they bring their wife and child if they had one, and or husband and child. But anyway, they were allowed to come here. But we put a stop to that. You can't bring your dependents anymore, and so as a result of that, a lot fewer people are now applying. In fact, this year, between January and March, 26,000 fewer people applied for student visas for the UK than the previous year. And so that means that universities who very much depend upon the very high fees that foreign students pay, they're all going to be very much short of money. I reckon 26,000 fewer students works out at about £500 million less money for universities who are already cash-strapped anyway. A number of them are on the verge of bankruptcy. So that doesn't seem to work out too well. So all in all, I mean, you can see people make a lot of fuss about Brexit. I mean, really, it's not quite as bad as it's made out. And we do still have areas where we're world beating, and I think the one area where we are absolutely ahead of all the rest of the world by a long, long way is in money laundering and tax evasion. Here we have a really, really sophisticated and outstanding sector. And if you look at the two charts from Statista, the first one is the first chart shows that we are the biggest facilitators of global tax abuse in the world. And the second chart shows that we have the most damaging tax havens in the world. We have all these tax havens, and people, what they do when they've got lots and lots of dirty money, they'll come to London and they'll find an accountant and they'll find lawyers, and they'll put all their money, they'll tell them they've got all this money, and these accountants, lawyers will put it all into tax havens for them, and then they'll put them into companies, and those companies be owned by other companies in other tax havens, and then they'll buy properties in London, and then nobody knows who owns them, and where the money came from. One story that came to my mind recently, and it was in the Observer, I think, last week, it was concerning a lady who was the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. She's called Sheikh Hasina. And she was deposed and she had to run away. She's now in India, apparently. She ran away after there were riots in which apparently 1,000 people were killed. I think she was a bit of a dictator. But anyway, when she's gone, it's transpired that she has something like £400 million worth of property in the UK, and the Observer looked into a lot of this. It also transpires that rich and successful businessmen in Bangladesh, between them, managed to get something like 13 billion out of the country, and no doubt a lot of it has come through London, and no doubt a lot of it is in property in London, and the rest is no doubt in our tax havens, because it's all set up here. You turn up with your dirty money and you're supposed to be checked, but of course anybody who's going to make lots and lots of fees as a result of dealing with you is going to do their very best to construct a case whereby they've checked the source of the funds and so on. You're not going to turn away that sort of business. And so all this dirty money coming into London is not actually benefiting the economy in any way, apart from the fact that, of course, it does employ a network of, as I said, accountants and solicitors and so on. And one slight interesting part of this story is that the Labour minister who's most closely responsible for scrutinising and updating the rules that govern the UK's financial sector is the City Minister. And she's a lady called Tulip Siddiq. And she happens to be the niece of this lady, Sheikh Hasina, the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh. So there you go. Oh, wheels within wheels, isn't it? No one's suggesting from her that she's involved in anything which is untoward. But all this money coming into London and through London, it's all inward investment. It's all showing confidence in the economy, and so nobody wants to disturb that. Nobody's going to disturb that at all. But in the meantime, a tiny portion of all the money that is defrauded from the government and tax that is evaded is benefit fraud, and that's what they're going after. They're going after benefit frauds, looking at people's bank accounts and seeing if they claim an extra £5 a week or something, and that's where they're targeting their efforts. Leave the rich people. And so, when you look at the state of the country, we look at how badly things are going. It's easy to blame Brexit, but it clearly isn't really Brexit. It's COVID. It's COVID and Putin invading Ukraine. That hit us much harder than it hit everybody else. I mean, nobody else is using it as an excuse anymore. It really hit us hard. And I think it's a lot to do with the EU being nasty to us. They've been really, really, really nasty, horrible. They hate us because we left, and they're just trying to get their own back. And I mean, for example, have a look at this map. This was in the Daily Express, so it's obviously reliable. This is from the Daily Express. It shows a network of proposed high-speed rail lines all over Europe, and you'll notice that the UK is left off it. You see, they do this to spite us, to get their own back on us, and so they're going to put all these railway lines all over Europe, but we're not included. But the slightly ironic thing is that most of our railways are, to a large extent, owned by the railway companies in France, the state railway companies in France and Germany, Italy and the Netherlands. It's also interesting that we pay higher train fares than anywhere else in Europe. And then there are other reasons. I mean, the weather's been a bit off, and I think probably the alignment of the planets hasn't been in our favour. But nonetheless, I think Brexit can be overdone. Because when you look at it really, you see who's really been affected by Brexit, who's really been damaged. I mean, not much really. I mean, you could say farmers. You could say farmers have suffered a bit because they've lost the CAP grants and so on, and they've lost their export markets. It's a bit difficult for farmers. But apart from that, I suppose the fishing they've suffered a bit because they all voted for Brexit because they wanted to get their waters back, British waters for British fishermen, and then once they got their waters back, they found they couldn't export to the EU because of the paperwork, and so they've all sort of sold all their boats and so on, and the fishing industry has kind of collapsed, and so I suppose they're a bit miffed. But apart from that, I mean, you could say manufacturing. I mean, for example, anyone manufacturing, especially if it involves just-in-time components, then that come perhaps from the EU or have to go back to the EU. Well, then, of course, they've been affected, and I think that's one of the reasons why Nissan are saying that they're thinking of closing their plant in Sunderland, which is, I think, 6,000 workers, which would be a pity. But apart from that, and the fact that 20,000 small and medium-sized firms will not be able to grow because they can't export to the EU, that's a little bit of an advantage. But apart from that, I mean, I suppose the fashion industry, yes, they find it a bit difficult because they can't easily deal with the EU anymore because of new bureaucracy, and of course all the duty-free shopping is gone as well. And the food exporters, I mentioned the food exporters, they're having a very hard time indeed. But apart from that, I mean, there's nothing much really that's been affected, I don't think. There is tourism. Actually, I did hear an interesting story about tourism. You know, the main thrust in our argument really is we don't want Europeans coming here. Well, before we left the EU, we used to get a lot of school trips, particularly French students come here. Spent quite a lot. It was worth about 100 million a year, apparently. And previously, they could come with an ID card because people within Schengen very often majority don't have passports. They no need to really travel to so many countries without a passport or using their ID cards that they don't have them. Excuse me. And we used to get all these countless thousands of school trips. Well, once we left the EU, we said, no, you're going to have passports now. All these children have to apply for passports, and it would cost money and time and all the rest of it. And after a while, we found that the number of school trips fell by 60%. And so the government went back into France, and they said, look, OK, we're going to have a special deal whereby schools can come with ID cards, but they have to fill in forms to come. And what happened was, and this happened last year apparently sometime, a group of school children coming from a town in north of France were going to go to Scotland for a week. And they all paid €500 each. And of course, children that age, it's a terrifically exciting experience that they remember for the rest of their lives. So they went on a bus to Amsterdam, where they were going to get a plane from Amsterdam to Edinburgh. And when they got to Amsterdam, somebody spotted, presumably the airline, they spotted that the forms had been filled in incorrectly, in as much as they put two numbers in one box instead of two separate boxes. And so they said, well, they couldn't let them go. Apparently, the Dutch border control got involved, and they contacted the UK border control, and they said, no, you can't come if the form's not filled in properly. And so these 50 children, 10 or 11-year-olds, all sent back home again. And I think that's the sort of thing, it lets them know that, we really don't want you to come here. And that story will have gone all over France. It wasn't reported in the UK press. I don't think anybody apart from Byline Times reported it, but it'll be all over Europe by now. And it's that sort of letting them know that we have other priorities now. We're more interested really in dealing with Peru and Chile and Vietnam. We don't want to deal with French people. We don't want to come here. And apart from tourism, which is affected because a lot fewer people are coming here from Europe these days because it's more complicated, because adults have to get passports. There are students who can no longer enjoy the advantage of Erasmus. That doesn't matter. It's just students. And they're entertainers, if you're in a pop group, or you're in an orchestra, or you're in a theatre company and used to tour all over Europe. You can't do that anymore. But that serves them right. If they're being so nasty to us, if they won't let us just go over there, then they'll have to do without our entertainers. And so all in all, I think you look at it again, it's Brexit's not so bad. And there's people grumbling a lot about it, but it seems pretty fine to me. Anyhow, that's what I think about it. If you've been kind enough to watch this far, thank you very much indeed. And until next time, bye for now.